David Okafor had everything money could buy: a billionaire empire, a penthouse overlooking Lagos, and 15 staff members catering to his every whim. But on the night he discovered his own brother stealing from him, his chef selling stories to tabloids, and his house manager skimming funds, he realized he was sleeping in a house full of enemies. Only one person had never betrayed him. Only one person looked at his 3 motherless children with genuine love instead of dollar signs. Only one person made his empty mansion feel like a home. She was his children's nanny. She was a university dropout with nothing to her name. What David did next would shock Lagos society, destroy his family relationships, and make him the most talked about man in Nigeria. He walked into his living room and fired everyone: the chef, the drivers, the security, the house manager, everyone except Grace. This is the story of what happened when a billionaire chose his heart over his reputation, when love defied every social boundary, and when 3 grieving children finally got the mother they deserved. This is the story of the scandal that rocked Lagos high society, and the family that emerged stronger from the ashes. Because sometimes, the person you need isn't the one everyone expects you to choose. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ikoyi penthouse, a relentless drumbeat against the glass that mirrored the storm raging in David Okafor's heart. He stood in his study, a cavernous room of teak and tempered glass, staring at the termination letters fanned across his mahogany desk. 15 years of building his billion naira empire, 15 years of relentless ambition, and it had all come to this. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in years, a cold, clarifying fury. It had begun with a discrepancy in the household accounts, a tiny leak his accountant had flagged. A leak that, upon investigation, had burst a dam of deceit. Security footage from his own study showed his brother, Michael, his own flesh and blood, casually transferring funds from a company account into his own. A discreet inquiry with a journalist friend revealed his chef, Mrs. Okonkwo, was the anonymous source behind a series of embarrassing tabloid stories about his late wife. And a forensic audit of the household expenses laid bare the systematic skimming by his house manager, Musa, a man he'd given a job when he had nothing. He was sleeping in a house full of enemies. His empire, his sanctuary, had become a nest of vipers. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. David?" He turned. Grace stood at the doorway, a silhouette of calm in the opulent chaos. She wore a simple blue dress, a stark contrast to the gold leaf and Italian marble surrounding them. In her hands was a mug of tea, steam curling into the air. "The children are asking for you," she said, her voice a gentle anchor in his tempest. Chidi had a bad dream. David's shoulders, which had been knotted with tension, relaxed a fraction. Grace, 28 years old, a geology student from a humble family in Ile-Ife who had to drop out when her father fell ill. She'd answered an ad for a nanny 3 years ago, a quiet, intelligent young woman with eyes that held both warmth and a weary understanding of hardship. The only person in his sprawling household who looked at his 3 motherless children with genuine love instead of calculating dollar signs. "I'll be there in a moment," he said, his voice rough with unshed emotion. Grace hesitated, her dark eyes studying him with a concern that felt like a physical touch. "Are you all right, sir? You've been in here for hours." He took the mug from her, their fingers brushing briefly. The simple human contact was almost shocking. "I've made a decision, Grace. Tomorrow morning I'm letting everyone go. The chef, the drivers, the security detail, the house manager. Everyone." Grace's eyes widened, the mug in her own hand wavering slightly. "Everyone, but sir, the household, the children's routines." "Everyone," he repeated, his gaze steady on hers. "Except you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and profound. Grace's lips parted in shock and she took a small, involuntary step backward, as if pushed by the weight of his statement. I don't understand. You're the only one I trust, Grace," David said, the rawness in his voice making it clear this was not a business decision, but a confession of profound vulnerability. "The only one who's never asked me for anything beyond your salary." the only one who sees my children as anything other than an extension of my bank account. He ran a hand through his graying hair, the gesture one of utter exhaustion. I am so tired, Grace. Tired of being surrounded by vultures in designer clothes. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small and very young. What will people say? Your family, your friends, the Lego Society pages. They will crucify you. My family? David let out a short, bitter laugh. You mean my brother Michael, who embezzled 2 million naira from the company? Or my sister Neka, who tried to sell a fake story about my wife's death to Punch newspaper? Those family members? Grace flinched at the pain in his tone. She had been there through it all. The public scandals, the private betrayals, the late lonely nights when David would sit in the children's playroom, not speaking, just listening to the echoes of a happiness that felt a lifetime away. She had seen him at his most broken, and she had never judged him, only offered a quiet presence and a cup of tea. The children need stability, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. That's what matters most. And in that moment, something seismic shifted in David's chest. He had been so consumed by his own pain and anger that he hadn't noticed the quiet revolution happening in his own home. He hadn't noticed when Grace had become more than just an employee. She was there every morning, patiently helping 7-year-old Tunde with his homework, calmly navigating 10-year-old Amaka's stormy preteen moods, gently answering 5-year-old Chidi's endless, wonderful questions about the world. She had filled the cavernous void his late wife had left, not by trying to replace her, but by simply being present, by being good. Grace, David said, closing the distance between them. The air crackled. I need to tell you something. She looked up at him, her expression vulnerable and uncertain. Yes, Mr. David? These past 3 years, you've become essential. He paused, the words feeling both dangerous and liberating. Not just to the children, but to me. I know this is inappropriate. I know I'm your employer. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just professional gratitude. Grace's breath hitched. Mr. David, I'm in love with you. The confession seemed to silence the very rain outside. The world narrowed to the space between them in that dimly lit study. Grace's eyes filled with tears, and for a terrifying moment, David was certain he had destroyed the one pure thing in his life. And then she whispered, I've loved you for 2 years. A tear traced a path down her cheek. I thought I was going mad. Every time you'd smile at the children, every time I'd find you asleep in their room after reading them a story, my heart would ache with a feeling I had no right to have. I thought about what it would be like if we were a real family. David reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. Her fingers were small in his, calloused from years of honest work, and they felt like coming home. Then marry me, he said, the words leaving no room for doubt. Grace laughed, a watery, shocked sound. You're insane. Do you know what people will say? Your family will think I trapped you. Society will call me a gold digger. Your late wife's family. They will never accept it. We'll have to accept that I am choosing a chance at happiness over their perpetual mourning. David finished, his voice firm. Grace, I've spent 15 years building a fortune, and the only time I feel truly wealthy is when I watch you with my children. If that makes me insane, then I will be the happiest madman in Nigeria. She was crying openly now, nodding even as she tried to wipe her tears away. This is foolish. Reckless. Completely, David agreed, pulling her into his arms. Your family will never forgive you. I know. The media will have a field day. We will be a public scandal. Let them. Grace looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but radiant with a hope she could no longer contain. The children will finally have a mother who chose them, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Not the money, not the status, them. They stood there, holding each other as the storm finally began to subside outside, and David felt something he hadn't experienced since his wife died, a profound, unshakable peace. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the grand living room, glinting off the crystal decanters and polished floors. David stood before his 15 staff members. They were a portrait of Lagosian professionalism, immaculate uniforms, respectful postures. But David now saw the cracks beneath the surface, the shiftiness in Musa's eyes, the smug set of Mrs. Okonkwo's mouth, the way his driver, James, couldn't meet his gaze. "I'm letting you all go," David announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Effective immediately. You will each receive 6 months' severance pay and a letter of recommendation. But as of today, your employment here is terminated." The room, once silent, erupted into a chorus of gasps and muttered protests. Musa stepped forward, his face a mask of feigned confusion. "Sir, if this is about the accounting irregularities, I can assure you, this is about trust." David cut him off, his voice like ice. "This is about loyalty. This is about the fact that I can no longer share my home with people who see my family as a prize to be plundered." Mrs. Okonkwo's eyes narrowed, darting toward Grace, who stood quietly by the staircase observing. "This is because of her, isn't it? That Nanny. She's poisoned you against us. She has juju on you." David's jaw tightened. "Grace is the only person in this house who hasn't stolen from me, lied to me, or sold my family's privacy for a handful of naira. She is staying. The rest of you have 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave the premises." As the disgruntled staff filed out, shooting venomous looks at Grace, David felt the weight of 1,000 expectations lift from his shoulders. He was burning his social standing to the ground, and he was using the flames to warm his own home. The news spread through Lagos high society with the speed and force of a tsunami. By noon, David's phone was a constant buzzing hive of alerts. The first to arrive was his brother Michael. His Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon screeched to a halt in the driveway, and he burst into the living room like a man possessed. David was on the floor with Chidi, helping him build a Lego tower. Grace was reading to Amaka and Tunde on the sofa. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Michael shouted, his face contorted with rage. "The entire family is on the phone. You fired your entire staff? To marry the nanny?" Amaka looked up, her book forgotten, her eyes wide with fear. Tunde instinctively moved closer to Grace. Chidi's lower lip began to tremble. "Lower your voice," David said, rising slowly to his feet. "You are in my home and you are frightening my children." "I'm frightening them. You're the one who's making a public spectacle of this family." Michael's venomous gaze landed on Grace. "And you? What did you do? What promises did you make? How did you trap a billionaire when you couldn't even finish your degree?" Grace stood up, her posture straight, her voice steady despite the pallor of her face. "I think you should leave, Michael." Michael let out a cruel, disbelieving laugh. "You think I should leave? You are nobody. A servant. My brother has clearly had a mental break, but when he comes to his senses..." "Get out." David's voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a slamming vault door. "Get out of my house, and do not come back until you can speak to my future wife with the respect she deserves." Michael's mouth hung open. "Future wife? David, be serious. She's the help. She's from a village. She is the woman I love," David said, each word a hammer blow. "She is the woman who has been more of a family to my children than you have ever been. And if you cannot accept that, then you are no brother of mine." The two men stared at each other, a chasm of betrayal and disappointment widening between them. Finally, with a sound of disgust, Michael turned on his heel and stormed out, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. In the ringing silence that followed, little Chidi began to cry. Without a moment's hesitation, Grace scooped him up, holding him close and murmuring soothing words into his hair. Amaka ran to David, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small, "are you really going to marry Miss Grace?" David knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Yes, my love, I am. How would you feel about that?" Amaka thought for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Does that mean she'll stay forever? Like a real mummy?" Like a real mummy, David confirmed, his throat almost too tight to speak. Good, Tunde declared from the sofa, his small face set in a determined expression. Because if she leaves, I'm going with her. Grace laughed, a sound that seemed to chase the last of the shadows from the room, even as tears streamed down her face. No one is going anywhere, Tunde. We're a family now, all of us. The wedding was a small, defiant affair. It was held not in a cathedral but in the sun-drenched garden of the penthouse, surrounded by the children's brightly colored drawings and pots of vibrant hibiscus flowers. The conspicuous absence of David's family was a presence in itself, a void that spoke of severed ties and harsh judgments. His mother had called, weeping, the night before. His sister had sent a single, scathing text. You are a disgrace to our father's name. But there were a few who came. Their pastor, who had baptized David and known him since he was a boy, officiated with a gentle smile. And Bisi, his late wife's best friend, attended, holding David's hands before the ceremony and saying, She would have wanted you to be happy, David. She would have wanted her children to be loved. Anyone with eyes can see Grace is a good woman. As Grace walked towards him on the arm of the pastor, she took David's breath away. Her dress was simple, elegant, and utterly her. Her eyes, locked on his, were filled with a love so sure and steady it made his own eyes sting. You look like everything, he whispered as she reached him. You look like you're about to pass out, she whispered back, and the shared smile that passed between them was a private fortress against the world. The ceremony was brief but profound. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the children erupted in cheers that were far more meaningful than any polite applause from a society crowd. And when David kissed Grace, it was not a chaste peck for the audience, but a deep, heartfelt promise that tasted of hope and a future built together. At the small, intimate reception, Bisi found Grace alone for a moment, admiring the simple gold band on her finger. You know the gossip won't stop, don't you? Bisi said gently, not unkindly. At the school gates, at the club, in the magazines, they will always call you the nanny who stole the billionaire. Grace looked across the room. David was dancing with Amaka, her small feet balanced on his shiny shoes, both of them laughing. Tunde and Chidi were playing tag around the tables, their joyous shrieks filling the air. I know, Grace said, a serene smile on her face. But I also know what I'm getting. A man who valued my heart over his reputation. 3 children who call me Mummy Grace without a single prompt. A family I get to build from love, not just obligation. She turned back to Bisi. Let them talk. My world is right here in this garden. 6 months later, David stood in the kitchen of his Ikoyi penthouse, a comical scene of domestic chaos unfolding around him. Grace had gone to register Tunde for a new, more progressive school, and David, in a fit of paternal ambition, had promised the kids he would make pancakes. The results were educational. A thin veil of smoke hung in the air, and several blackened, disc-shaped objects sat piled on a plate. Daddy, they look like charcoal, Amaka observed with the brutal honesty of a 10-year-old. They are well done, David corrected, valiantly trying to scrape the charred remains into the bin. Chidi giggled uncontrollably from his booster seat. You're a funny cook, Daddy. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his lawyer. He wiped his flour-dusted hands and read it. His breath caught. After a thorough home study and numerous interviews, the family court had officially approved Grace's adoption petition. It was done. She was now, in the eyes of the law, Amaka, Tunde, and Chidi's mother. As he stood there absorbing the moment, his phone rang. The screen flashed. Michael. He hesitated, the memory of their last confrontation still sharp. Then he answered. Michael. David. His brother's voice was subdued, stripped of its usual bluster. I called to apologize. For the things I said. For how I acted. It was unforgivable. David remained silent, letting the words hang. I saw the pictures from the school's International Day last week. Michael continued, his voice softening. Bisi sent them to me. Grace was there with the kids. Amaka was holding her hand, and she was looking up at her. I haven't seen that child look that happy and secure since before her mother passed. It reminded me of how we used to look at Mum. Before the pressure, before the money, when it was just us. David leaned against the counter, the smoky kitchen fading around him. What are you saying, Michael? He asked, though he already knew. I'm saying you were right, Michael said, the admission clearly costing him. You chose them. You really truly chose them over everything else, and they are thriving because of it. I can see it, even from the outside. He took a shaky breath. I miss you, brother. I miss my nieces and nephew. And I would very much like to apologize to Grace in person if she would allow me. David looked at the scene before him. The beeping smoke detector, the giggling children, the evidence of his own domestic incompetence. He thought of Grace, who had not tried to create a perfect staff-run show home, but a real, messy, loving home. A home where burned pancakes were a memory they would laugh about for years. Come to dinner on Sunday, David said, the forgiveness feeling like a weight being lifted from his own soul. Grace is teaching me to cook jollof rice. It will almost certainly be terrible, but it will be honest, it will be ours. Michael laughed, and it sounded like a fresh start. I'll bring dessert, and a very, very good bottle of wine. As David hung up, the front door opened and Grace walked in. She took one look at the smoky kitchen, the pile of ruined pancakes, and David's flour-dusted, sheepish face and burst out laughing. You fired the entire staff, married the nanny, and it turns out you can't even make pancakes without setting off the fire alarm? She teased, walking over to him. In my defense, David said, pulling her into his arms and kissing her firmly. I was distracted by how profoundly, ridiculously happy we are. Grace kissed him back, her laughter subsiding into a smile that tasted of home and lipstick. The children groaned in mock disgust, but their faces were beaming. The adoption went through. David whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. You're officially their mother, in every way. Grace pulled back, her beautiful eyes shining with tears of joy. Really? Really? She looked over at Tunda, Amaka, and Chidi. Her children now, legally, emotionally, forever. And David saw the moment the reality settled deep within her soul. This wasn't a scandalous headline anymore. It wasn't a rebellion or a fairy tale. It was their life. Messy, unconventional, criticized by those on the outside, but fiercely, joyfully, and completely theirs. Mrs. Grace Okafor, she said, savoring the name, the title, the life it represented. My wife, David said, his heart so full he thought it might burst. The woman who saved my family. Grace reached up and cupped his face, her touch gentle and sure. We saved each other, David. And she was right. Outside, the vibrant, chaotic, ever-judgmental city of Lagos hummed on, a symphony of ambition, traffic, and gossip. But inside the penthouse in the smoky kitchen with the burned pancakes and the laughing children, David Okafor had everything he had ever truly needed. He had fired everyone except his nanny, and in doing so, he had found the only fortune that mattered, a family built not on the shaky foundations of blood or wealth, but on the unshakable bedrock of choice, trust, and a love that had defiantly, beautifully, crossed every line to find its home. And that, David thought as Grace patiently showed him how to properly mix the batter for a new batch of pancakes, while Amaka narrated their every move for her YouTube channel, was worth more than all the billions in his bank account. The end.